I mean, come on. Were you expecting any different? It's the 2023 Padres, for crying out loud! Recapping last night's very dreadful loss against the Colorado Rockies, and more importantly, and for the sum of the show, we won't be fully negative. We're just talking trade deadline. Today is the day it has arrived. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for August 1st. That's right, we're finally in August, in my opinion, the worst month of the year. It's either this or January. I think August. But, as always, I am your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, and you can see my written baseball coverage over at justbaseball.com. Great website. And at LO_Padres as well for the Twitter account for the show, which has been a little bit less active lately. Don't worry, I've just been a little busy, but don't worry, we'll get back to it. And then Locked On Padres on YouTube. And today's episode, I think is a good one. It's an important one. It's a vital one, ladies and gentlemen. It is brought to you by GameTime. You might be familiar with them. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Go check out GameTime. Today's episode, we're doing a good old recap, and then we're doing a trade deadline, dare I say, manifesto. Dare I say, like, what my dream is for this trade deadline, I think is a big question. And look, the Padres have been quiet, and I am recording this episode in the morning because the game started a little bit late. I was really tired, so I had to rewatch it this morning. So there's a good chance that, like, in the middle of this recording, something may happen. And if something does happen, great. I will restart my recording. That's totally cool. Or I'll just post this and it could live as a live reaction to some trade that goes down. But the Padres haven't been really doing anything just yet. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They're just kind of looking for the right thing. Part of me is wondering if Preller's eye was so, honed in on the Ohtani sweepstakes that, he forgot about all the other stuff. I'm joking, of course, but that's kind of what it feels like a lot of teams went through, where everyone was focused on Shohei Ohtani. And now that he's been made off the market, the deadline has gotten a little weird, a little stalled. Just a little bit. We still have some big deals that have been proposed and all that stuff, and some players that I think the Padres should go after. But before we do that, again, let's recap last night's game. It was a disaster. Not in we lost by 12 cents, but we lost once again, another close game. 4-3 win for the Colorado Rockies. So much wrong in this game. I keep saying that the Padres have loser energy. This game is such a testament to that. They make about a bajillion bad plays in this game. And it's not from starter Seth Lugo, who once again goes pretty strong. For a guy who was a former reliever, goes 7 strong innings, allowing 2 earned runs on 5 hits. Only one of them was earned because of an error by Mr. Juan Soto in the outfield. Because why not? You know what I mean? He'd been okay lately in the outfield, but guess what? We're gonna give we're gonna make it that you have to make a mistake. So Juan Soto, once again, his defense is very bad. And the Padres, unfortunately, weren't able to get to Austin Gomber, former Cardinals prospect Austin Gomber, who was the return in the infamous Nolan Arenado trade. The salary dump that turned into them just signing Chris Bryant for more money next year. Anyway, Colorado Rockies are a mess, and I think that for the Padres to lose to them after you had just swept the Rangers is, again, the loser energy permeates. I mentioned the Soto error. Also tonight, and also, by the way, Seth Lugo, 9 strikeouts. He did pretty good this game. It was great. Despite all that, the Padres unable to hit Austin Gomber, who heading into this game, again, you just swept the Texas Rangers. You are in a mode of you need to win a lot of games in order to make the postseason. You need to go on a run. And what do? You lose to the guy who had a 5.83 ERA heading into that game. So that's great. And a big reason for that is because aside from just the inability to get hits, Xander Boagerts grinding into the National League leading 15th double play of his season. Just a disaster. Xander Boagerts has been truly for the Padres. It looks like they overpaid potentially. Again, it's too hard to judge a deal like that in its first year, because as I bring up many times, Corey Seager and Marcus Semien were both pretty shaky, especially the latter last season. And then this year, they've been part of the reason why they've been so good. I know he wasn't deadly against us, but it's hard to give a verdict on a trade like this so early, or a signing like this so early. So I'm not going to get super mad at that, but it is worth pointing out that it's like, if you signed a shortstop for less, or if you had signed just a lower tier guy and you have Kim at shortstop, whatever, maybe you're not getting this level of disappointment. Maybe you're getting at least the same level of production, and you don't have the giant baggage of an 11-year deal kind of clouding your future, whether it be with prospects like Jackson Merrill, or just potentially signing someone different, right? Like, because you have this backlog, this jam on your team, because of so many people extended for so many years, it creates an issue. And with Xander Boagerts, again, he hasn't been like the worst I've ever seen in my life. Part of that has been his defense, which has been big for the team, for sure, although he does make a little bit of an error every now and then. I think he made one in the Texas series as well. I mean, 2.6 F4 isn't the worst in the world. Like, it's just not. It's pretty good, but a lot of that is only because of his defense. This year, he's slugging .395. It is by far the lowest of his career. .454 slugging percentage for his career. He's hitting .264 with a .344 on base. Lowest batting average of his career by a lot, with the exception of his first 2 seasons in which he barely played. And then in terms of his on-base percentage, .344. That's basically about the career mark. But the problem is that he's not getting big base hits. He's actually walking more this year than he did last year in his great season with the Red Sox, by 1.2% more, which is interesting. But the WRC plus, I think, really says it all. 108 WRC plus. He's basically expensive Ha-Seong Kim. It's basically what he's been doing. He's about like 22 million more for what Ha-Seong Kim did last year. Not even good Ha-Seong Kim from this year. That's basically what Xander Boagerts has been. In terms of the batting average, in terms of just not striking out too much, getting some walks every now and then. But the WRC plus, Kim's was around like 104 or 108 last year too. So again, just really disappointing season for Boagerts. He actually ends up getting, roasted enough on Twitter, as he should. And Manny Machado, by the way, while he is certainly having a bounce back lately, he goes 1 for 3 in this game, and he also draws 2 walks. The Manny Machado was also pretty bad this year. Again, he was bad for 3 months. Who knows how he's going to finish up August and September? I hope he does great. But I'm just saying, while we are quick to blame Boagerts, and we should be, there's at least, we've seen this before with guys going to a new team, guys going from American League to National League and vice versa. In this case, American to National, obviously. And it's the first year of a big contract. It happens sometimes. It happened with Francisco Lindor that first year with the Mets, happening with Xander Boagerts. I'm just hoping that this isn't... The way to be scared of this deal early is if the wrist issue has been exacerbated a lot. Now, we don't know any full details on that because he's played through this wrist issue before. In fact, last year when he put up a 6-4 season. So we don't know that for sure. But if that is the only way, I think that you can really pass judgment on the deal immediately, is if this might be a player who this wrist issue is really problematic and might actually hamper them. Considering they've played so long in the league, maybe just the wear and tear of it all, right? So that's the big issue there. And if that's the case, then I don't know what AJ Preller and company were doing, thinking that they should give a player like this. I wasn't aware that Xander Boagerts had a wrist issue that was going to plague him and not be an issue that can be really solved with surgery. So those are dangerous, what's the word? Very dangerous implications there. If this is an injury that can't be really solved with surgery, and it's an injury he's just going to have to play with, and you have him for 11 years, and he's been playing for so long that maybe he's just going to keep doing damage to it. So I don't know. We'll have to see. Not to get too dark on this whole podcast, but again, Padres disappointed. Trent Grisham actually gets a home run in the top of the 9th to tie the game. Matthew Batten also gets a big RBI for the team in the top of the 7th. So they fought. They fought a little bit. They certainly did. They at least made a little bit of a comeback. I still think, again, that you need to just watch this team play. Teams like this don't make the postseason. You know what I mean? Like, that's why I am on the side of we should sell. I really am. I just think that you're not going to be able to make it, and I don't want to lose Hader and Snell for nothing in what has been a seller's market where all sorts of players are getting dealt and getting way, way, way more prospect value than you would have thought. And we have the 2 best ones. You've seen Max Scherzer. You saw what he went for. You saw what Lucas Giolito went for, right? You saw what Aroldis Chapman went for. You saw what Jordan Hicks went for. I think we could potentially dictate the market. But again, unfortunately, despite the late game heroics from Batten and Grisham, Ryan McMahon, sacrifice fly. St. Gary, unfortunately, unable to come through with a big hit with the bases loaded in the top of the 10th. But what can I say? That's the Padres for you. Before we continue talking, though, guys, and before we talk about the trade old deadline and some fun mock trades that we got going around the Twitter sphere that I want to talk about, let me just take a second to tell you the glory of GameTime. It's a great app, folks. It's really, really great. Flash deals, last minute tickets, easy to find the tickets for your area for every kind of event. That's right, every kind of event. That's the key word here. You want to go to a basketball game? No problem. Just because we're a baseball podcast doesn't mean we object to all the other lovely sports out there. You want to go to football? Go ahead. You want to go to comedy show? That's right, not just sports. It may be called Game Time, but it's not just for games. You can go to comedy shows, theaters, all sorts of stuff. All sorts of stuff that they have included in there. Your concerts. Maybe you want to go on the Eras tour with Miss Taylor Swift. I assume she's still touring. I don't know. I'm not a music guy, but still, you could go do that. Game Time has you covered, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. They're killing it. Absolutely killing it over there at Game Time. So guys, snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem LOCKEDONMLB in the old redeem code section for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Download Game Time today. And we keep it moving. It's a simple episode today, guys. We did a game recap, and now we talk about the deadline. The problem is that both of those things are really complicated, particularly the latter with the trade deadline. So the Padres, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, we haven't gotten any word, on what they're going to be doing. Again, I am a proponent of selling. I just think last night was so predictable. Like, you should have seen it coming. It's the Rockies, a team that even when the Padres are good, have trouble facing them. Again, it's baseball weirdness. And the loser energy was there with all the errors. I didn't even mention on Juan Soto's error, also sending him to home in that one inning, and he is out by a mile. They try challenging it and say that he was blocking the plate, which maybe he was, but also you were so out by a mile that I think that would have been ridiculous if they had, said that he was safe. And as Xander Boagerts so eloquently described last night via Dennis Lin of the Athletic, he described his performance tonight as trash. This one's on me, he said. Well, what can I say? It's just, this is what they do. But with the deadline today, I think that one of the interesting things, and John Heyman had tweeted this as well, is that apparently Josh Hader really isn't going anywhere. And I do think that is interesting that they said Josh Hader isn't going anywhere. I thought that was interesting because John Heyman basically said that teams, that he was told that one team inquired about Hader, and basically the price was so high that they basically think that the Padres are basically just keeping him, unless you were to get something crazy, right? Like unless the Jackson Holiday or Justin Holiday, whatever his name is, over in Baltimore, unless that was offered up, right? So we'll see. And it looks like the Orioles might be going after Verlander, but again, this is a seller's market, and I think the Padres should be a part of it. That being said, there's some fun trade ideas to talk about, and the Padres do have options because, again, I don't think they're going to be competing with all that many people when it comes to getting like a big bat. Heimer Candelario was just traded to the Angels, right? Like that was a big potential deadline bat. That one got moved, no shocker whatsoever. But guys like Cody Bellinger are staying. Santana's already gone. Randall Grichuk got traded. Like there's not, in theory, all that many bats left. My boy Joey Meneses, who I said was an interesting potential ad to look at, actually homered last night, so you heard it here first. But I think that there are three players that I want to talk about in terms of bats, and I think that two of them are incredibly realistic and somewhat fun, and then the other one is unrealistic but super fun and probably super irresponsible. I wish that this was a live show so I could ask you guys which one we should do first, but let's talk first, I think, about the big superstar one, and that's Luis Robert of the Chicago White Sox. I saw a fun trade proposal yesterday that I really enjoyed, and I asked everybody's thoughts. And I'm going to read everybody's responses because I was surprised by how many people were universally against this. The trade would have been for the Chicago White Sox. They get Trent Grisham, Dylan Lesko, Jackson Merrill, and Paulie. Who the heck is Paulie? Hold on. I probably should have checked this before. Who is that? I assume it's one of our Grand Paulie. Okay. What number prospect is that? I'm not even totally sure. Padres prospects. Well, I looked that up because I probably should have looked that up before. All four of those guys in exchange for just Luis Robert of the White Sox. Now, you might be first thinking, all of that just for one player? Well, hey, first of all, we did that for Soto last year. And second of all, Luis Robert is basically having his ultimate breakout season. And Chicago White Sox are terrible. Abjectly, awful. And they basically only have players to sell. Luis Robert is 5th in F4 this season, and he's got 29 home runs, which is awesome. While he is still a problem in terms of his, strikeout rate, 29%, 29.2% to be exact, not great, and he only walks 5% of the time. That makes his slash line a little bit less exciting. 269, 323 in terms of batting average on base. But because of the slugging, he's still got a 137 WRC plus. He's a pretty speedy base runner, which is good. And then also on top of that, really good defensive player, Luis Robert. So we're talking about a franchise caliber player, which is not something that any Padres fan has been daunted by. Apparently they're able to acquire anyone. And like I said with the defense, 9 outs above average and 7 defensive runs saved. So one thing that would make sense is while you would lose Trent Grisham in this deal, you basically just get, what if Trent Grisham was amazing as a hitter, right? He's better defensively and he's better as a hitter, obviously, Luis Robert. So it would be just a straight up upgrade. So there's not an immediate, oh God, where do we put Grisham? Where do we put this guy? Where do we put this guy? He would slot right in. So I think that's why the trade is getting brought up and mocked and whatnot. And I actually think that this is a very fair proposal. Now, Jackson Merrill, of course, widely considered by many to be a top 10 prospect in baseball. Obviously. Deservedly so. He's been raking everywhere he goes. He's been exciting for a while. And it's funny because they drafted a shortstop and everyone's like, why? We have so many shortstops and, well, who cares, right? Preller and company do deserve credit, I think, often for finding new golden eggs, after trading a bunch of them. Now they have 2 new ones, right? This is just what they keep doing. The other one being Ethan Salas. So that's really, really exciting for the Padres, for sure. Now, that being said, let's read the replies. And I was really surprised by what some of you guys said on Twitter. Remember, every now and then I post questions like this at @LO_Padres. At Mojave Madness said, really would just rather hold on to Merrill at this point. I don't know if adding another piece is going to save us. At Infinic Jest. Oh man, that's an incredible at. I hope your name is Nick because that's incredible. He says very succinctly, no. Ryan Willis at Wacky Willis at Wacky Willis SD says, nope, he will forget how to hit the second he gets here. To which I responded, extremely tough but extremely fair. Gerald Porter Jr., Gerald P. Ports Jr., my apologies, says, hell no, Zavala maybe. Be hesitant with Lesko too. Ram Murdy says, longtime listener of the podcast, says, not giving up Merrill right now. Someone said, Ricardo Espinal, who I forgot to respond to, said, is Chicago shopping Robert? That is a good point. I just want to mention really quickly, there's been reports that the White Sox are willing to listen on anybody. I bet you that applies more for Dylan Cease, because Dylan Cease has I think that what's important with the White Sox is Luis Robert is young and really controllable, so I doubt they'd want to move him because he's also a position player. I think Cease I could see because he's also not having the best season of his career. He can be really irresponsible with walks, even if he does get a lot of strikeouts, and he's not been doing so well this year, so I could see them maybe moving on from him. The reason why these guys would be on the market is because the White Sox have no farm, and they're last in probably the worst division in baseball. Even worse than the NL Central. Much, much worse. At least the NL Central has a lot of talent and interesting guys there. The Minnesota Twins are about to win that division just by default. You know what I mean? That you have to have a division winner. So that's why the White Sox are shopping, because they have absolutely no farm, absolutely no hopes of winning the worst division. They got to do something. At Padres Fan Takes says, White Sox would take this deal. The value is fair, but I'm sticking out with Jackson Merrill in San Diego. Kid just flat out hits. Someone's Beef at Armed Truth says no way. Fernando Mania Part 2 says control through 2027. Yes, honestly. And then last person, Tyler Nelson. Honestly, it's a good trade for both sides. Merrill is blocked. I will say, to attest to that, and people were responding and had Etnica was responding in my mentions talking about like, with the whole blocking thing, because of Ha-Seong Kim and because of, most importantly, Xander Boagerts, there is a question about Jackson Merrill. And I bet you that AJ Preller would be more willing to move on from him because of this, because of the Boagerts deal, because of if you move Jake Cronenworth off first base, he's an infielder. And then, of course, you have Ha-Seong Kim. I think that there's a question of where exactly is he going to fit on this team when he gets up. My interest in Jackson Merrill has nothing to do, I will say, with his levels as a player. I know that this is my job to analyze and give my takes on draft picks and whatnot, but it's not really my thing for young guys. I look at a farm system as value, and I look at a farm, not to dehumanize these guys, of course, but just in terms of baseball terms, I look at farm systems as just assets, ammo in the chamber, right? And don't get me wrong, I think that there are some guys you just don't trade. And I think a lot of teams have been getting to that point where you just don't trade these guys. Those top 10 golden egg prospects, your Gunnar Hendersons, your Wander Francos, your Chris Bryant back in the day, right? Your Adley Rutschmans and your Colton Cowsers and your James Woods, of course. Now, James Wood, of course, ended up traded. So if there's any team that's going to trade these guys and buck against the trend that we've seen major league teams have and exhibit, is that those top 10 golden egg prospects don't go anywhere because they're so controllable. And I think teams are expecting at the very minimum an average player. And if you get average player basically for like less than all that much money and you don't have to commit to them long term, that's why they have so much value, I think, the prospects. Everyone outside of that is different. In the case of Jackson Merrill, he's a golden egg prospect. And for me, that's why I don't want to necessarily trade him, even if it is for Luis Robert. I just feel like we come to this point every single season. When we get excited about some superstar player and we're like, blow up the farm for this guy, you don't get that guy all that often. Those players aren't available all that often. And blah, 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 blah. And with Luis Robert, again, control through 2027 is pretty nuts. This is like really cool that you'd be able to control this guy for so long and not have to worry about some giant extension immediately. And I know that's an anti-player sentiment, basically, but hey, look, the Padres have been paying everybody. So at some point, from a baseball strategy standpoint, you have to start considering that stuff. So Luis Robert in that regard would be awesome. Does his strikeout rate scare me? Yes. That scares me as someone who doesn't want to trade again the future, again, for a player that might have some really bad flaw. Again, I think Luis Robert's fantastic, but what if he becomes like a 3-win player next year instead of the 6-win player that he's on track to be right now? I think his F4, as we speak, is currently at 4.2. What if he becomes a 3.5 next year, right? Like Xander Boagerts did it. So I just think that if there's one lesson we should all be taking from the past few years is, how about we just chill on trading from the farm? And I love that they're able to regenerate this thing like they have Wolverine's healing factor. Like every single time they make a trade, we thought Blake Snell deal was killing the farm and Yu Darvish, like both of them in the 24-hour span. We thought, wow, that's killing the farm and Musgrove. And then ended up that they were able to regenerate it, and the stuff that they gave up didn't turn out all that great for the Tampa Bay Rays. So, hey, the Rays aren't, they're not infallible. So shouts to them. So I get it from that standpoint. And I do think that the value is fair. I think this is a shockingly fair trade. And considering that we don't get a lot of those with the trade machine on Twitter, I want to applaud this lad really quickly. What's his name? What do we got here? Mickey Koke. I don't know how to say your last name. From TTF Baseball. Interesting. Anyway. I thought that was like a remarkably fair trade. I mean, I saw some trades this weekend that were like giving up Soto and Snell and Hader for like the Orioles' like third best prospect and then a bunch of randoms. I was like, come on, really? Like, come on, guys, this is ridiculous. Oh, but it was their dream trade. Yeah, of course it's their dream. Yeah, my dream trade is to get Shohei Ohtani for Joshua Mears straight up. Duh. Okay. So I think that with this trade, I could see it both ways. I would be very thrilled, obviously, and excited, and part of me is wondering if this is like the femme fatale, where like it's like a seducing Preller, and he's been focusing so much on getting another superstar that he's forgotten about, keeping the farm together and just having more flexibility with the roster going forward, considering they've been so disappointing this year. I wouldn't mind bucking the trend a little bit. We've got superstars, guys. You got Manny, you got Tatis, you got Soto, you supposedly have Xander Boagerts. You have Ha-Seong Kim, who's a superstar now too, basically at this rate. So I wouldn't be so ready to trade those guys. I actually think that I'd rather keep them and just kind of chill. because we've done so many trades lately that I kind of want to just buck that trend. So yeah, that's just me. I think that he's a fantastic player, and I will be excited if they were to do this. I doubt it will happen. But it's interesting. It's still interesting that it's a trade that is very shockingly fair. So shouts to Twitter and my guy Mickey. Last two guys I wanted to talk about. The safe, but not as nearly as exciting, but really won't cost that much. So I think that they're a lot more realistic acquisition targets. Ty France and Teoscar Hernandez. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh my God, the guy that we gave up for Austin Nola, we would be really like taking it on, we would be really showing our butts if we had to go back and then acquire him, right? Totally fair. In the case of Ty France. But then you might also be thinking, well, those guys haven't been all that good. Exactly. You would basically be buying low on these two guys for the Mariners. The Mariners recently came out. It was kind of, came out. And again, when I wrote my deadline guide and I was talking about potential targets, it wasn't known whether or not the Mariners were going to punt on this season. I think it's smart of them to. I thought that they were actually going to be the second half breakout team, but they immediately stunk it up as soon as the All-Star break ended. But a lot of their guys, from Cal Rayleigh to Julio Rodriguez to Eugenio Suarez to Ty France and Teoscar Hernandez, who we're going to talk about, everybody's had down years, right? Like all of their players have basically gotten worse. JP Crawford being the lone exception, kind of figuring out how to hit this year, which was awesome. 129 WRC plus for him. Decent defense. Just a reliable player. But for the most part, including Julio Rodriguez, really bad sophomore slump for him, right? And despite the home run derby that he was awesome in. So sophomore slump for him. That maybe we should have foreseen this. But with Ty France and Teoscar Hernandez, they both are really interesting. And I know that they're not necessarily players that you are like thrilled about because they're both having really down years so far. And I think that is where I come in and say, let's try and do something different. Instead of buying high on everybody, let's try buying low. Get low, everybody. That's what you got to do every now and then. And Ty France has control for a while. He'd be an unrestricted free agent in 2026, which is great. And then Teoscar Hernandez, who I'm looking up right now, he would be an unrestricted free agent a little bit sooner, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to look him up real quick. Teoscar Hernandez. That both of these guys, like I said, are having bad years. He's actually I was wrong. He's a free agent after this year, it looks like. Interesting. I thought that he had one more year, but anyway, so he'd be 31. So one of them would be a rental, one of them would be for a lot longer. Ty France, in terms of this year, having a down year. For the past 2 years, he's been a hitter's hitter. He hasn't been a guy who hits for power, but he has been a guy who hits for batting average, on base, and has a pretty decent glove at first. 0.2 F4 this year though, and that's because his WRC plus is cratered. Last 3 seasons, he had a 133, 130, 126, and now 98. So he's been bad this year, like abjectly bad. Which is why you'd be buying low. And you'd be saying, this guy could be our first baseman for the future, or at least for a while, and then maybe you figure out what you do with Cronenworth. But then, exactly, that's the problem, is that I don't know exactly what they'd be doing with Jay Cronenworth, who a lot of his value the past couple seasons was his defensive value in the infield, at second base, occasionally at first base, and then, of course, at shortstop sometimes, right? Like, that's where he got a lot of his value. And he's extended for another 7 years, which is why this is a great example of why I didn't understand why they made that move. You know what I mean? There's sometimes seems like there's a short-sightedness on the Padres with their roster construction. They have too many guys that you can't move around. So Ty France, you'd be getting at this stage to be your DH. Maybe potentially they could find something out with Jay Cronenworth because you can move him around. Maybe you find a buyer. I don't know, especially with that extension. It gets really rough. But you plug Ty France over at first base. And then if you were able to somehow, let's pretend Xander Boagerts wasn't here, Jay Cronenworth's in the infield with Ha-Seong Kim, that's not an awful future for the Padres, especially with how disappointing Boagerts has been. But instead, because that's not the reality, and that's not the reality of this roster's makeup, you would be putting him at DH. And as a DH, you could do worse, I will say. DH is a position that I think you want to get some power from, which is why I think the second guy makes more sense between these two. But again, I just think that Ty France, with the down season, he would be a really appealing buy low candidate. I just don't know exactly where he'd fit on this team. But I will say that the draw for him is that he wouldn't cost as much. But honestly, if you're going to trade for Ty France and have a weird lineup construction, part of me is like, let's do that Robert trade. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking. But anyway, Ty France, like I said, becomes a free agent in 2026. Maybe you shouldn't buy in on a guy who's having his worst season in a while. However, with Teoscar Hernandez, a guy who is having, again, his worst season in a while. But what I like about Teoscar Hernandez, and what I think makes him fit for this season, is that on top of having a really poor season so far, there's only one way to go, and that's up. Look, remember the Atlanta Braves when they won the World Series? I'm not saying that's what we're going to do. I'm just saying if the Padres are going to lightly buy, which is what the reports are indicating, this is what I would do. I like Teoscar Hernandez. And I know that sounds crazy. He's only got a 93 WRC plus this year. Past 3 seasons, he was very much above that. 129 last year with the Blue Jays, 132 the year before, and 142 the year before that. So he's been awesome. He's hit more than 25 home runs, right? Like he had 25 last year, and then he had 32 the year before. The problem is that this year his strikeout rate spiked and his walk rate went down. Spiked up from 28.4% to 32.1%. The ISO is very good for the most part. It's not very good, but it's okay at 168. That's not as good as what it's usually supposed to be for Teoscar Hernandez. But hey, Seattle is a pitcher-friendly ballpark, so maybe you could look at it from that perspective. And again, he has not been very good. He's not a great defensive player, which is why he would fit as a DH, as a rental. And I don't think it would cost all that much. Because again, he's going to be a free agent after this season. Only one way to go, and that's up. And if you were to trade buy low on this guy, which I really think you can because of the fact that he's an incoming free agent and he's had a bad year, you only have upside, right? And this team should only be looking for a deal that is only one thing, and that's upside. Get a rental, because if you're not going to sell, which again, I'm only going by what I've heard so far, then that's what I would do. I love this idea. I love the idea of bringing in this guy who has super duper offensive firepower. I don't want to be relying on Matthew Batten, who, shouts to him, got a big hit last night. Guy had 3 singles, actually, one of them being an RBI. I love Luis Campusano. As you guys know, I am part of the Campusano Hive. Some would say I'm one of the leaders of the Campusano Hive, at least a general, at least a captain, at least an assistant general, something like that, a high-ranking officer, that I would love if he DHs for the team sometimes, right? But I just like the idea of a super buy low, and you look at the Atlanta Braves from years ago. I'm not saying we're going to the World Series, but if you're going to buy, they went in on Adam Duvall and Eddie Rosario and Jorge Soler and all these guys, and they basically bought low on separate role players who then only had one way to go, and that was up. So that's why I like this move so much. Ty France, I think it would be funny if they brought him back, to be perfectly honest with you. But with Teoscar, only upside. And I know he's been shaky this year. He's been bad this year, like really bad. And I don't know if he's going to turn it around. This would be entirely predicated on just different situation type of thing. And also, by the way, in the outfield, he's not terrible defensively, I will say. Not terrible. He's actually doing all right. Shouts to my guy. He's got a 6 defensive runs saved, actually, this year. And then he's got, let's see here, 1 about above average. So he's not terrible. Okay, shouts to my guy, Teoscar. He's been worse before. And that the other thing is that he's not heating up at all, right? Like, even guys like Tim Anderson, who have been pretty bad this year for the White Sox, he's been heating up, and that's why he's been drawing interest ahead of the deadline. Teoscar had 1 month this year where he was awesome, and it looked like he might have figured it out. He stopped swinging through pitches the same way he was before. He actually made adjustments, and that's why I thought that he was actually one of the reasons that I thought that the Mariners were going to get better. I thought that they were going to blow up, or at least just have a better season. Like I said, he had a really good June. 303 average, 376 on base, 573 slugging. And then unfortunately July went cratering back down to earth, 200, 248, 286 slash line, like the worst of his season somehow. So again, this guy I just think would cost nothing, and he has a high ceiling. If this guy hits like 20, if he reaches like 28 home runs the rest of the way, like that would be a pretty big get for the Padres for what I would assume would be pretty much nothing. And if you're going to buy, that's what I would do. Again, I am a proponent of selling. I want to get rid of Hader and Snell because I don't think it's smart. Oh, well, why don't we re-sign them if they're so good? I don't want to do this again. I don't want to give more of a I know they're pitchers, and that's a little bit different versus our lineup, which is where most of the long-term deals are, but I still just don't want to do that. I don't want to be so locked in to so many players. It's just, I feel like that's what got us into this trouble in the first place, where they don't have any flexibility. That's what I would do at the deadline. Teoscar Hernandez for some, back outside the top 10 prospect. You rent him for half the season. Maybe he catches fire. Maybe he doesn't. if you're going to compete, I think that that's the way to go. I really do. And the Luis Robert thing is really exciting. But in order of what makes the most sense, I go Teoscar number 1, Robert number 2, France number 3 in terms of what makes sense. France is too much of a jam. I don't know where he would fit. And I don't like him as a DH. I just don't think that that would be the best position for him. I don't know. I want power out of my DH. I want someone who can be the X factor out of my DH when we're going up against great teams. Someone who could tie the game with one swing. I don't think Ty France is one of those guys. But that's just my opinion. That is just my opinion, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Lockdown Padres podcast. Of course, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. And of course, stay tuned for the rest of the week. Going to be talking with Aram Layton about prospect stuff. Probably depending on what the Padres do. If they either sell Hader and Snell today, then we'll be talking about the guys they got in return. Or if they trade for a guy, then who they gave up. So that should be a lot of fun. He's the prospect guru. And then Millard Thomas, we're going to be doing a trade deadline recap. I mean, how can we not? How can we not? Maybe we'll do another draft. Maybe we'll draft our favorite deadline deals. That should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to that, and looking forward to recapping the rest of the week of games for whatever this absolute cyclone of death that this season has in store for us next, guys. But until next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.